Well, good afternoon again, everybody. I'm Randi Braun, and welcome. I am the founder and CEO of the leadership coaching and advisory firm Something Major. I want to thank you all for coming and say good afternoon to those of you who have joined us on the East Coast. I know we continue to have some folks trickle in, I see from the West Coast, and we even have some folks who shared that they're going to be listening in from Europe. So wherever you are, I hope that your day is going well. Something Major is dedicated to empowering working women and working mothers to live their very best lives, feeling like they can be more fulfilled, more successful, less burnt out, like they're living and leading on purpose. And of course, helping their teams and organizations do the same, especially those of you who operate in high performance, high volume, high demand, and high unpredictability environments. Once a month, we come together for this event, Let's Do Lunch. And really born out of the lack of connection that so many of us feel in the pandemic, we decided to put this event together once a month, where I bring one of the exceptional women that I have the pleasure and privilege of calling my friends to chat with me and to chat with you about a topic that they are passionate about. That is why today I am thrilled to have my dear friend and former Comcast executive and leadership expert, Alicia Daugherty, here to discuss living fearlessly. Alicia, welcome. Can we see you?
Hi,
Hi.
welcome. You can see me now, right?
Yes, I can. I am so happy that you are with us. And Alicia, I'm just going to introduce you to our group and read your bio for a moment because it is so impressive and I don't want to get a single detail wrong. I see you already blushing. So let me just introduce you to the Something Major community, Alicia, because we are so excited to have this conversation today about living fearlessly. Alicia is a certified coach and founder and principal of Alicia Daugherty Coaching, LLC, a leadership and executive coaching practice she launched after retiring from Comcast Cable as the Vice President of Consumer Experience Transformation. Throughout her 30-year career in cable telecom and electric utility industries, Alicia held executive positions in customer experience, program management, and field operations. Her passion is helping leaders at all levels improve their performance and their fulfillment through deepening self-awareness, understanding their impact, and defining concrete actions. Alicia is also an alumna of many prestigious degrees and fellowships spanning Harvard Business School, Wharton, Villanova, and the University of Delaware. And if that was not impressive enough, she is also the mom to 2 grown children, yay, working moms. And she and her husband, Jim, are award-winning home brewers who reside in Chester County, Pennsylvania. Welcome, Alicia. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you. And I'm so excited to be here with you, Randi.
This is a topic that you are just such an expert in, and I know that fear has played a big part in my personal journey. I know it's played a big part in your journey. I know that so many of the women who are joining us here today, and we have some men are always welcome here, that fear is really universal, even, and I would say especially with high-performing, successful women. And so as we go in, would you mind sharing your experience with fear in your career and why this is a topic that you're so passionate about?
Sure, absolutely. So I think I'll start with why I'm so passionate about it. And it's because as I have sort of shifted from my corporate career into my coaching career, I have become aware of the fear that I've carried and how it's in some ways served me and how in many ways it's held me back. And it comes up as a theme so frequently with people that I'm coaching is this notion of fear and recognizing it, figuring out what to do with it, and just learning to sort of manage through it. And so speaking for myself, I like literally think back to as a child, what were the things that I was afraid of? I was afraid of dogs. I was afraid of my parents dying. I was afraid of people not liking me. I had all these like what I'll call now little fears or sort of fears of the imagination. And then as I grew, I was I was always told like you can do anything, you can be anything, don't be afraid. And so I then had this notion that I had to be and do everything. And I sort of put myself in a place of not having choice. And so I would just plow through and do what was expected. And as time went on, I realized that I found myself so many times just, and we've talked about this term before, this notion of low grade dread. Like I'd wake up in the morning and immediately think, what did I screw up? What am I going to screw up today? Who's out to get me? What's going to happen to me? How do I hold on to this thing that I have that I'm afraid to let go of? And so that for me was sort of this awareness of what am I really afraid of? And I had a friend who years ago used to say, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And I think that is such a powerful question.
Such a powerful question.
And there are things that are certainly rational to be afraid of, right? The coronavirus is appropriate to be afraid of. We should be careful, we should distance, we should mask. There are bad things that can come of that. But the willingness to make yourself vulnerable to say, I'm afraid of being in contact with you, so I'm going to keep my distance. That's different, right? That's a little more personal. And then I'm afraid to get up and go to work today because I'm afraid I'm going to screw something up and it's better just to stay in bed. Like those things are there. It's all of it, right? It's all here. And so what's become so profound for me is just figuring out how to understand what it is, where it's coming from, and then make a choice to live, to work through it, to push through it, to move away from it, whatever is the right thing. But just that awareness and that consciousness and knowing that it doesn't have to feel that way. I'm really curious.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
would love to hear about your experience with fear.
You know, what you said was so striking to me. Fear is, for many of us, one of the first emotions we can remember feeling or identifying in our lives. And that there's nothing wrong with us, but we don't need to, just dissect or pathologize our childhoods, right? Like fear is a normal part of our life. And that's why I'm so excited about our conversation today, so that we can think about how we can use fear for good and how we can make thoughtful decisions about our fear and how we can be a little bit more fearless and a little bit more courageous. But what you said about your childhood, and I saw people are responding in the chat, oh yeah, fear of my parents dying, like that's one that they resonate with. For me, Alicia, I remember when I was a little kid, my family moved from New York City, from an apartment in Manhattan to a suburban home that was a ranch style house, all one floor. And I distinctly remember, it's one of the earliest memories I have as a child, is going to bed that first night and being like, my room is on the ground floor. Like someone could just walk into my room. Like I have no idea why I had that fear, because all I knew was this life where we lived up in the sky, right? And don't go on the patio or don't go on the terrace without anybody. But, thinking about my career, for years, I made so many of my professional decisions under the influence of fear. And this was in my corporate career. It doesn't mean I wasn't successful. I was. I actually even had so much fun, but I was secretly so scared all the time of deviating from some invisible rule book about what I should do and what I should say. And like, what am I going to do to keep this success? And it was almost like an addiction. Like I felt hooked on my fear and motivated by it, and truly like always chasing that next high of the external validation or having my success seen by others. And it really was like almost a high, because it would leave me hungover on the other side. Like I feel like I would go on these benders. And I feel like I'm in a version of my own fear sobriety. Right? Like I feel like I'm a recovering addict. I feel like I'm in this version, and it's like a true addict. Like I have the cravings, right? To go back to those old habits. Relapse is tempting and easy, and learning habits isn't. And I think what you said is so universal earlier about this low grade dread. Like a lot of us think about the fear of our parents dying or think about the fear of something big, but oftentimes we're carrying this low grade dread that you talk about, or this little fear through the day. Can you talk a little bit more about what this is and how we can identify it? Because we're all walking around with this invisible weight on our shoulders, and I'm not sure we ever really take the time to name it.
Yeah. And honestly, I wasn't really aware of it until it stopped. So for years, and I don't even know how many, but for years, I would wake up in the morning and my first thought was, maybe a 4-letter word goes in there. It was just this. And I even like, I loved what I did. I loved my work. My commute was horrible, but that was just part of it. And I had a wonderful life. Like everything was good, but I would always have this, and immediately I'd go to, okay, what's wrong? And it was, did I send that message? Did I word it right? Am I late for something? Am I going to be? What's expected of me that I don't yet know? Am I going to show up the way I want to? Are people going to see through me? Are they going to recognize the imposter that I am?
Oh
You
my
know,
gosh, of course.
things. It was all these things. Am I going to be late for work? Am I going to be late for daycare? It was just these, these things that just sort of pile up, and they just become sort of part of the air, right? You just don't even think to question them. They're just there. And in fact, I had a coach recently. We were talking, was as I was sort of coming to the decision that I was going to leave my full-time job and pursue coaching as my full-time career. And I was sort of in this place of wonder of like, I'm building this business and I'm doing this work and it's all good. Like, I don't get that. And she said, somehow you have a story in your head that if it's work, it's got to suck. And if it doesn't suck right now, eventually it's going to. And I was like, well, yeah. And then she said, but why? And so I really started to question, okay, what sucks today? What do I think sucks today? What do I think I have to live with? And I want to be clear. My job was awesome. My company was awesome. The people I worked with were great. There was something there that wasn't true for me. And I allowed that to turn it into all this little like nippy things saying, but what about this? But what about that? And it was something in me saying, you're swimming upstream. You're in a place that is no longer serving you. What do you need to do? And that's scary. So that's like the capital F fear of like, well, if it's not this, I've never done that. So I better just stay here, where it's the fear that I get and I know and I understand and I know how to be resilient against. And it's just this, but I would never have called it fear. But in hindsight, low grade dread, just every day waking up to the, where am I going to disappoint people today?
And it's just so remarkable to hear you talk about this, because when I met you, you were in this very senior executive role at Comcast. So clear from when I met you how much you cared about Comcast, how active you were in the industry, how much you loved your team, how much you were beloved by your colleagues. And I think we all walk around, and one of the connections I often see, especially with successful women when it comes to fear, is that we carry this fear. We spend so much of our energy trying to negotiate against it, and we feel shame around it. Like, why does everybody else have it figured out and I feel so overwhelmed? Why is my name on this article and I'm being honored for some award, or I just got this big promotion, and why am I still waking up feeling so afraid? And for me, that was the hangover element, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, no, I did this. Like, this is supposed to make my fear go away. And now I'm even more afraid. Like, I'm still having fun, but I'm afraid. And I'm like just drained and hungover. And there are so many types of fear that we experience, right? You named a few of them. There's low grade dread. There's what we call imposter syndrome. Alicia, I know a word that I like to use, and I hear you use a lot too, is our inner critic. And I personally don't like the term imposter syndrome as much, because to me, syndrome insinuates that we're deficient or sick because we feel it, when really, there's so many factors that go into that as a woman in the workplace. And then one of the frameworks that I really love about fear comes from a man named Rabbi Alan Liu. You don't have to be Jewish to get the concept, but he talks about, really interestingly, in Hebrew, if you read the Hebrew Bible, fear is described in two different ways. There's pachad, like you just said, Alicia, it's the imagined fear of like, I'm going to get sick with the coronavirus and my whole world is going to fall apart, right? That's like that fight or flight evolutionary fear. And that's a fear we need to deal with one way. But we also get mixed up what there's another word for in Hebrew, which is sometimes translated as nora or yira, which is a fear born of awesomeness. And so when we start to think about this, right, I only share the context because, there's two words and I think it's helpful, but I can't underscore this enough. Like, this is just a linguistic concept. It's not a religious concept. But there is a second word, right? And what I'm curious about, is that what your thoughts are, because for so long in my career, and I see this with my clients all the time, we're getting a fear of awesomeness, something we should be stepping into, something that is overwhelming, but it's because we're on the precipice of something really major, confused with a fear where we should go run and hide. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I love that notion of two different words because they really are different things. And there's probably more than two, but the way I think about it is like things that I'm afraid are going to happen and would be bad if they did. So I'm going to move away from that or do something to protect myself from that. And then there's the fear of like, throughout my career, any job that presented itself to me, if I wasn't a little bit afraid, I had no interest in it. Like fear is a motivator. Fear is like, oh, this is scary. Let's dive in. Because that's how you learn, right? Is by doing things that you aren't really sure you can do. And so there's an element of fear for that. But that's that second Ura type of fear versus the like something bad protect me kind of fear. They both exist all the time everywhere, and it's around recognizing, understanding, and then making conscious choice about what to do with that fear.
So let's talk more about that. I'm going to ask you another question. I want to remind everyone who's here to please use the Q&A box. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions. So I think everyone by now knows how to use Zoom, but just a friendly reminder, if you have a question, throw it in the Q&A. We would love to hear and take your questions. And Alicia, maybe while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I love what you're talking about, how fear can be this motivator. Fear is part of our life because it's true. Every single time we're either on the precipice of leveling up or we're just immediately on the other side of that up leveling, it's new, it's vulnerable, it's scary. So would love to hear your take on being fearless versus fearing less and how we start to unpack and almost like reimagine the way that we can use fear and think about fear.
Yeah, that's great. I really try to move away from the word fearless because I think it implies that, fear is something you shouldn't have, or that in order to be strong or successful or courageous or whatever it is, you need to not have fear. And I think about a quote from Nelson Mandela. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And that is how I think about it. So I do use the term fearless, like recognize the fear and then make a choice about it, lean into it, move away from it, protect yourself, but really not allowing that fear to drive you without conscious choice. And so I talk to women all the time and I've actually sort of looked at stories of different people and the things that, what was the time you were afraid and what did you do? How did you move past it? And so I have one friend, Edwige, who moved as a 20 something from her native land of Ivory Coast, got on an airplane with a suitcase and a French English dictionary, showed up in the United States and said, I'm going to be an engineer. People were like, well, you don't even speak the language. So she'd read in her book and explain what she meant. And she would time after time show up. People tell her she couldn't. And she'd say, okay, well, if not that, then what about this? If I can't be the engineer, what about a lab assistant? If I can't do this, what about that? She's now an executive with a telecom company and she's doing amazing things. And she's sharing that. She has a large presence in terms of just motivating other people. And that's a scary thing, right? It wasn't that she wasn't afraid. It's that she knew that what she wanted to accomplish on the other side of that, she had the ability to do, and she found the way to work through it. And then I'll speak about my daughter. So my daughter had challenges with eating disorder, self-harm. She had a lot of challenges as a young woman. And the scariest thing she ever did was come down one day and tell my husband what was going on. We got her the help she needed. And as a result of that, she shifted her profession. She was studying music industry. She shifted to psychology, and she's now doing awesome things as a case manager in the health field. And so the things that were driving those behaviors were scary, but the act of getting herself help was the scariest thing she ever did. And she says she knew that if she didn't, she would probably not be here. And so those things are what motivate me to think, okay, what's really getting in the way and what's the thing on the other side? And, for myself, just making the decision to leave my company 5 years ahead of plan and do something I frankly never thought I could do or would do and am absolutely loving. That was scary, but it doesn't have to be a big life-changing, life-saving, life-altering thing. It can be as simple as asking for help. So I have a dear friend who had a very similar role to mine, was leading a huge very visible, very scary project. And at one point finally realized she needed help and raised her hand and said, I need help. That was a scary thing to do. That's a hard
It
thing
can
to,
be.
yeah, because you put it all out there and you say, this is me. I thought I could do it, but I can't. And the gift was the help was there, her ability to create connection with people, and those connections carry forward and enrich the relationships, certainly enrich the outcome. But it can be big things, it can be small things, but recognizing it and understanding, okay, what choice do I have? And what does the other side of the fear hold for me?
Yeah, I love this. And we're starting to get some questions that I'm going to come to in just a second. But, one of the things you said resonates so deeply with me, not just with my own personal experiences, but when I think about all the women who I work with every day, oftentimes we're talking about why they're held back from doing something because of their fear. And we talk about all the costs associated with possibly messing up, possibly being found out. And we never, or too infrequently, stop to think, what's the cost of letting our fear hold us back? We just don't ask that question enough. Like, what's the cost, right, of not asking for help? What's the cost of not making a change? Nobody ever got to the top of their game emotionally, professionally, intellectually, being like, you know what? I climbed this mountain all the way using fear, and I feel fantastic. No, we have this really contorted, twisted narrative in our head because we know that fear is something that keeps us safe. We just get into trouble when we let it hijack our decisions. And we're going to go to the questions from our group in just one second. But one thing I wanted to just drill down on, because it speaks to some of the questions we're getting, is, you spoke of these women making some pretty serious, big, courageous, and bold moves. I'm a huge believer, I know you are too, in like the micro moments of like, what is the tiny thing you're going to say yes to and the tiny thing you're going to say no to as a baby step towards something big. And so I'm curious if you have any tips. And again, like I said, keep sending in your questions. We're getting a ton. We're going to go to them in a second. But any tips? Saying yes and saying no is one of the frameworks that I like to use. Another framework that I like to use is, Alicia, do you know the story about the Great British Olympic cycling team and their gold medal records by any chance?
No.
I'll just tell you this and on our listeners really quickly. Essentially, the Great British Olympic cycling team won 1 gold medal in Sydney in 2000, 2 in Athens in 2004. And after the Athens Games, they got a new coach who had a theory. He didn't think the team was going to make huge performance strides in a single performance area. Instead, he had this 1% strategy. He wanted them to make 1% gains in 100 places. The best fitness routines, diets, equipment, even the best pillow. And for 4 years, they traveled the globe with those best pillows. And 1% here, 1% there, they quadrupled to 8 golds in Beijing and held down 8 golds again in their hometown games in London. And so I like to think about saying yes and saying no. I like to think about evaluating the cost of letting fear drive us. I like to think about looking for our 1% moments instead of our 100% moments. And I know you have so many insights on how we can find these small moments instead of these huge moments of grandeur. Any tips you would share?
Yeah. So I love that. I love that story. And I love we talked about the yes, no framework. I think it's kind of like, what am I saying yes to? And what am I saying no to? And the way I like to think about it is, what's important for me right now? What is important? And not letting all of the big things that are scary and overwhelming come in, but like, what's one thing that's important? And it really does come back to understanding yourself, understanding your values. What's your purpose? What's your vision for your life? And then, and a lot of times it'll become much clearer. That thing that I was afraid of, that's not serving me right now. That's I can let that go. That's not going to hurt
Yeah.
me. My friend Amani, who I think of one of the bravest people that I know, her thing that I always think of her for is she stands up for other people. When she sees other people being belittled, dismissed, ignored, not valued, she will, like Mama Bear, come in there and stand up for them. Yeah. And the way she frames it is, well, I did that before and I didn't die, so I'm going to do that again. So it's sort of like, what is the real cost of doing that thing that I'm afraid of? Maybe I'll look silly. Okay, we're human. What's really going to change versus living in that place of self-limiting thoughts and behaviors. And so finding
Yeah.
that, what's the one thing I can do now to start shifting how I'm feeling about this situation?
And I remember when I was thinking about quitting my job, my corporate job that felt very safe. I had two kids under three. And I just remember being so scared to take that leap. And really, the tipping point for me was, to your point, is like, well, what's the cost of not doing this?
Mm.
What's the cost of not, seeing how it goes and pursuing something I'm passionate about? And it doesn't always work out like this. I know I personally have never looked back. But we're getting so many amazing questions. And I want to go to one from Janine because it goes to what you just said. And Janine's asking, Alicia, a few more examples. What are some of the ways you can actively lean into fear to move forward? And anything we can do to practice that more regularly?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say, think about, I mean, sometimes it's truly starting with, what is it that I'm afraid of? And especially when you're living in that place of low grade dread, it just sort of all seems negative and risky, or, the more you let that build up, the harder it is to kind of dig through. I picture like being in a forest and like kind of digging through the bushes to find sunlight. So
I love that.
like really stop and think, what is it that I'm afraid of? What is the bad thing that might happen? Often we'll find the thing isn't really that bad. Okay, so I accidentally sent an email to 20 people that I meant to send to one. Oops, I mean, we've all done it, right? So what's the bad thing? And then can I make it funny? Can I make it better? Can I not hide from it? Can I use it, and especially as a leader in an organization, can I use this as a moment of vulnerability to say, oh, we all make mistakes, right? Because sometimes as a leader, the further up you go in an organization, the more people expect like perfection. If it's, there aren't any flaws, but being willing to be vulnerable and say, I don't know, I screwed up, I'm afraid I hurt your feelings. That
Yes.
can be really hard to do, but asking, what is the thing that I'm afraid of? And just face that. Just face it head on.
And sometimes we live our worst fear. I mean, I'm laughing as you're telling this story about sending an email to one people to 20. I see Julia here, who worked for me on my team many years ago when I lived one of my, it's so silly, but it was like I had this fear that I was going to mail merge to the wrong person. And I would pull lists, I would mail merge, nothing would ever happen. Julia, I don't know if you're here and you remember this story, but but what I was going to say is that I pulled a list and I could have sworn it was 40 people, like just at one client organization. And Alicia, this was a large publicly traded company. I accidentally mail merged the list to 4,238 people. I could not stop the merge. It literally crashed my Outlook and then crashed my computer. And as you can imagine, I did not own all of those client relationships. And I got a slew of angry emails because we were a global company from people all over the world, because I did it in the afternoon East Coast, not only people in the States, but all my European colleagues who woke up to it the next morning.
My palms
And yeah. And you know what? It really wasn't a big deal. Like, I had a few angry emails, we had to make nice. I can guarantee you I never did it again. But sometimes just like actually living our fears, the world keeps turning. And I love that story because it's just comical now. I just like remember the feeling of the computer crashing and being like, I can't make it stop. Like, it's happening right now and I can't make it stop. But I do want to offer one formula that I personally like to use, because I find that most of our fear comes from this inner critic inside of us, right? Like that voice of self-doubt, that voice of questioning, that voice of self-judgment. And Alicia, to your point about recognizing it, my formula is, number one, recognize, right? Like, now I'm going to use that metaphor, crawl through the bushes, see what it is. Like, okay, what is it that I'm fearful of? Like, where is this fear coming from? Step two, reframe. Because we know that inner critic inside of us, it's not there to do harm. It's there to keep us safe. So instead of using that critic's voice to heap judgment on ourselves, I usually like to try and reframe. I ask myself, I ask my clients, what is the critic's voice? What is that voice of fear trying to keep you safe from? Right? And really just asking yourself, like digging one level deeper, reframing, okay, where is there a risk that I need to see here? And then thirdly is comfort. And it's counterintuitive, but I like to get my clients to actually, and I do this with myself, what feels like 100 times a day, like comfort that voice of fear is like, okay, you're afraid that you're going to embarrass yourself in that meeting. Okay, let's collect some evidence and facts of other times you've done a great job. Let's collect some evidence and facts about how much you've prepared and about what you might be able to do to feel more secure, to comfort that voice of the critic, to comfort the voice of fear.
Yeah.
And change your perspective there. So recognize, what is it I'm afraid of? Reframe. This is not about self-judgment. This is about risk. This is about risk minimization. 3, comfort. And it sounds like you had a reaction to that, and then we'll take another question from the group.
Yeah, I was thinking about just literally taking the emotion out of it and looking at the facts. What are the facts here?
Clinical. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Like sometimes I feel like I have to be like an anthropologist, right? Even with myself, it's like step back and it's like, the woman in the floral blouse at the desk is now getting lathered up about XYZ thing, right? It's like that degree of separation. That's one of my inner allies, Alicia, is the anthropologist, whose goggles I put on metaphorically sometimes. Okay, we got a great question from Jenny, and it's about the somatic elements of fear. And I'm so excited. I just have to put in a plug. Mine and Alicia's dear friend, Dr. Karen Barnard, double board certified physician, is going to be joining us for March's Let's Do Lunch about how we talk about these things, taking the woo-woo out of the mind-body connection. And it's about important things like this, like Jenny's question. So Alicia, you'll get the first crack at it. And then Jenny, I hope you and everyone else will come back on March 26th to go deeper with Karen. But Jenny asked, when we were talking about the different types of fear, the fear of I'm going to get the coronavirus versus the fear around awesomeness, like I'm on the precipice of getting that job as CEO, or I'm on the precipice of locking down this huge client and this huge presentation. Where do we look for that fear? Should we feel it differently in our body? Is it something we should know in our gut? Any thoughts there on the somatic elements of fight or flight fear versus awesome fear?
Yeah, I love this question, and I am so excited for your conversation with Karen next month. I will say, I think for everyone, it's probably different, but I think it's so important to be attuned to what's going on in your body, because the body knows, right? The brain tells us things that aren't true. The body is always telling us the truth. And so I think really paying attention to that. I'll speak for me. If it's you know, I live in the country, so like a raccoon running toward the patio when I'm sitting there, my heart race, my face flush, I'm up and I'm out, right? I'm going somewhere where that animal can't get to me. And that's just like the visceral thing. So I feel it. I feel it in my throat, in my heart race, and in my, my body gets very, very tense. If it's waking up in the morning and thinking, what did I screw up today? Or what did I screw up yesterday? Or what might I screw up today? I feel it as like a fluttering in my heart that goes to my throat and almost feels like it wants to silence me. Like, just keep your mouth shut so you don't say something stupid. It's that kind of thing. But I feel it, it's up high. I can hear it in my voice. My voice gets thin and reedy. And I realize that's a fear of the fear screwing up kind of thing. Wow, this is a big scary thing. I can feel it in my gut and in my sternum, kind of like all in here. And it's this like deep like squeeze, but like a good thing, like a squeeze that's going to be a powerful punch or something like that. So again, I'm saying words to describe feelings, and I don't know if it's anyone can sense,
Yeah.
but everyone is going to be different. But really understanding, getting to know your physical reactions and what that means for you, you will see a pattern and you will learn to recognize it, and that can make it easier and quicker to deal with it, to just sort of make the choice. Okay, that's a thin, reedy voice thing. I don't need that today.
And let's actually just take a minute with the group to do this. We have a really nice group who's joined us live, and I just want you to take a moment and think about a time where you were afraid in a real safety situation. Maybe you were on a plane and there was a lot of turbulence. Maybe you almost got into a car crash. Maybe you found out that someone you know was diagnosed with a medical condition, or you heard horrible, terrible, life-changing news and you were scared. Just take a moment and just go back to that place. Maybe even close your eyes for a second. And as you remember that experience, think about where you feel the sensation. Is your chest tight? Are your brows furrowed? Are your toes clenching? Maybe it's none of those things, right? But just start to think about that. And then I want to ask you to think about a situation where you were afraid, but it was that awesome fear. Um, Briefing someone that you've never briefed before, going to a job interview that you really, really wanted. And then again, I want to encourage you to think about where you felt that sensation. To Alicia's point, for me, all of my somatic sensation happens in my chest. When I am scared, it feels like all of the blood rushes to my body, like in a moment where there's like turbulence on the plane, all the blood rushes out of my limbs. I get really cold and I feel just this pit in my stomach and this tension in my chest. When I am excited and nervous, I get almost an effervescent feeling in my chest. It's as though someone popped a bottle of champagne. And by the way, I've not always recognized that. It takes work to learn those sensations. And so the question Jenny asked us in some ways is like almost chicken or egg. What comes first? Is like, do we know which somatic sensations to look out for? Or are we learning the differences between fear too first? And I would say that's iterative. So again, plug, Britt, maybe throw the links. Brittany from my team is joining us here today. Brittany, maybe throw the link in there for Karen's chat. We'll be diving deeper into this next time. And I want to take another question. And Alicia, this is such a perfect question for you because to me, you are the people management expert par excellence. And this question comes from Janine. She, like many of the other women who are joining us here, manage other people, lead teams. And what she's asking is, how can we start to be smarter about recognizing fear in other people so that, you know, we can help them live more fearlessly?
Yeah, I love that question. So I think number one, as a leader, it starts before the signs of fear ever show up. It starts with building the relationship and getting to know people. So you sort of know what their baseline is and you know if something's off. And even if you can't describe it, just knowing there's something off there. And so I think it's always perfectly appropriate to ask, what's going on? What's happening right now? And not from a tell me the story standpoint, but where are you? What are you experiencing? If you kind of know, like there's a situation that they are feeling fear and you understand what it is, I think it's fine to say, I would be afraid. If I were where you are, I'd be
Yeah.
feeling fear. I'm not saying that you are, but if you are, it's completely normal and natural because sometimes we're so afraid that saying someone's afraid makes them afraid doesn't work that way. It's acknowledging, and it might be something different. They might have had sad news. They might have been up all night. They might, could be a number of things, but not naming it for them, but making it okay to be in whatever state they're in. But it starts well before that observation and conversation. It starts with developing the relationship such that you can ask those questions and not create a new level of fear. Why is my boss asking me? Or if it's a peer or anyone, just knowing the signs, staying tuned and not being afraid to ask the question, is something going on? What's happening?
I actually think that's the biggest place where leaders, whether they're stepping into their first, management role, like taking on their first 2 direct reports, or they manage a team of 200, is the universal. The number one, I feel like, baseline mistake I see people make is that they don't spend enough time just asking questions. They spend a lot of time telling. They spend a lot of time giving feedback, delegating, but they don't spend a lot of time asking questions. And so I think that's a great tip. Just building off what you said, to offer to other people, like let this be one place where you're leveling up your questioning, leveling up a place where your conversations are truly dialogues. And I'm just laughing, Alicia, as you're talking about this, because my friend Chelsea Cummings, who's here, I noticed that she put in the chat earlier when I was talking about how when I was afraid to quit my job and take something major full time, she wrote, "I was afraid for you." And and what I loved was I just remember in that moment, from Chelsea and my husband, Benji, who's downstairs, and other people in my life, it felt the more people checked in and said like, "Hey, you're doing something really big. Like, how are you feeling about it?" Instead of just being like, "Good luck," or "You're going to be great." It made me feel okay in my fear.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me feel like my fear was normalized.
Yeah.
So Chelsea, I'm just laughing hysterically seeing that in the chat. I love you. Thank you for saying that. And Alicia, I want to pivot now to another question that we got. And this person asked a question. They're currently saying this. I'm looking for a new position. And we have a few people here who are joining, I believe, who are in the process of thinking about what their next big move is. And so this person is not afraid and having fear hold them back in their career progression. And she says, I keep finding myself doubting my own abilities. I know I'm great at what I do, but I have a lot of trouble in the face of rejection or that taking more time or things taking more time than I hoped and always remembering my value. The fear of unemployment being more long-term holds me back from being my most confident in these interviews. How can I keep that self-confidence front and center? Any tips?
Yeah, so I think of it as sort of a couple of step process. And the first is to get in touch with, people call it different things, inner leader, true self, just sort of the core of who you are. And a way to think about that is think of those situations in your life where you were all on it, all in, best day of your life. You did something great or something great was done for you, but just sort of take yourself back to a place that was the best feeling that you had. And then really feel it, embody it, get in touch with it physically, think of the words that describe it, and really get to know that true self. We'll call it true self. And then spend a little bit of time understanding your saboteurs. So we talked about this phrase before. These are like the voices in our head that tell us all the bad things, and they're there for a reason. They showed up one time to protect us, and they've kept us safe. And in most cases, they don't really serve us well anymore. So one could be the judge, right? And we talked about the inner critic, somebody always telling you what you're doing wrong. They do that so that you don't embarrass yourself, so that you don't make a mistake, but they're not telling you the truth. That's just a story. So if you can recognize that and say, that's not true, but what's true is that person that I was in touch with, and just, it's a practice. It's like anything, it's a skill. And so taking a moment to, it's back to, what am I afraid of now? Who do I know myself to be? And then do that on a repeated basis will put you in a place of having that confidence. And even, it doesn't mean the fear doesn't show up. It means that you have created the ability in yourself to recognize that it's not serving you and move forward. And then, I do think there's an element of think about what's the worst that can happen. And it's just not that bad.
Following fear to the end game, right?
Yeah.
It's like following our fear to the end game.
Call
And
it bluff.
yeah, right. And call its bluff. It's like really funny. We get really whipped up with these fear stories in our head, and the stories don't often make sense. They just don't, right? And so like when we follow fear to the end game, sometimes the end game could be so irrational. And not because we're deficient or irrational, but just because like fear by nature isn't always rational. And so just building on what Alicia said, I just want to offer a few other tools that I like to use with clients, and frankly I use with myself. Like, and I just want to be crystal clear, Alicia, I think I speak for you in saying that you probably feel the same way when I say this. Like, just because I'm a coach and you're a coach does not mean that we are free from fear or free from negative self-talk in our lives. I feel like I have like this whole arsenal of like tips and tricks and little life hacks that I've become really, really, really habitual in using, but I am so not free from fear. And so I want to share a few things that I know work for me. I want to share a few things that I know work for my clients. And these are really, really tactical tools that you can use in the moment. So number one, we already talked about that recognize, reframe, comfort formula. But when it comes to like a big moment, there is social science that shows us, or science rather, that like just writing things down can help get them out of our head. And so I recommend two things. Number one is, Kelly and anyone else who's like, I feel like I'm choking on my fear in big moments, in advance of that big interview, write down, in addition to following your fear to the end game, write down 3 alternative scenarios in which the situation could end in, right? It's like, okay, alternate scenario 1, I'm going to bomb. Scenario 2, like it could go okay. Scenario 3, I could answer 2 questions really well and totally miss up on another. Like actually look at the different scenarios. That's one suggestion that I have. Another is to write down all of the things that are happening in that talk track of fear. We can't mute it, but sometimes what I'll have clients do is like grab a baggie or a mason jar or a Tupperware sitting in their kitchen, write down all those fear talk tracks, put them in little pieces of paper, and just put them on your desk. And then when you sit down on the Zoom interview, you don't have to be listening to them over and over again in your head. You've like bottled them up and they're there. Like they're being taken care of, put in storage. So those are just like a few little things that I recommend. Unfortunately, like I wish we could power pose our fear away. Science shows that doesn't actually work because we can't cheerlead fear away. And what Alicia's getting at is that like a lot of times dealing with our fear has to do with doing harder work and doing deeper exploration. So some of those little tools are little things that you can do to start that work in small incremental bite-sized pieces. Alicia, any other tools or thoughts or reactions that you have for that?
No, I mean, I think to your point, it's a practice. It's making the choice and building the skill and until it comes naturally. I love the little put your fears in a jar thing. That's like, I love things that are physical, tangible
Yes,
reminders
physical.
of what we already know, but often forget. So anything like that works for you, like in your environment, I love it.
Yeah, it's like I don't have to think about my fear because it's literally sitting in a mason jar, just like bottled in my desk. Like I was doing this on the phone one day with one client. She's like, I don't have a mason jar. I was like, grab a baggie, grab a Tupperware, you know, as long as it's just something that's contained. And one of the questions we got was, do you have any literature, books, blogs to help discuss this? Alicia, I know I write about this. You write a lot about this. We're going to share our personal websites, some links to some articles and some events and programs that we're running. But I do just want to share this book that's on my desk. This is Playing Big by Tara Moore. Tara is actually one of my teachers. I've had the privilege and the pleasure of studying with her. And again, cannot recommend this book highly enough, Playing Big by Tara Moore. And one of the things, and it speaks to Kelly's question, is so much of our fear that I see from women comes from how we're going to be perceived, what the feedback is going to be, spoken or unspoken. And there's a framework that Tara has in the book that I love, which is that feedback tells us much more about the feedback giver's perspectives, values, and priorities than it does about us. I'm going to repeat it because it's so important. Feedback tells us more about the feedback giver's perspectives, priorities, and values than it does about us. And so as your fear is attached to feedback or how you'll be perceived, I want to offer that as a reframe tool as well. Alicia, I'm curious, any favorite books? That was one of the questions that we got. You know that I'm obsessed with this book. I basically have all of my clients read it. It's required reading in my group coaching program. I mean, like, I am obsessed with this book. Not being hyperbolic when I say that. What are your favorite resources?
Yeah, so a couple. I mean, I would say anything by Randi Braun, right? She's got Dare to Lead, Daring Greatly, and she talks about fear from a standpoint of shame and things that we so much want to hide about ourselves. But when we face them and bring them forth and allow ourselves to be vulnerable, it's so freeing, and it makes so much space for the getting the things that we want, right? Another great one is Grit by Angela Duckworth, and it really just talks about that building resilience and kind of learning to be and be strong and be capable and just be the things that you are. It's really a beautiful book. And then there's another one, and the name of the author is escaping me, but it's called Brave Not Perfect. Yeah, we'll think of the author, but it's really kind of, you know, acknowledging like so many people are striving for perfection or being the best or being the expert before they even put themselves out there. And the reality is, if you can just try, the trying in itself is an accomplishment and shows the world that you know you're capable of something. And then that sort of builds on itself, being willing to make a mistake, willing to screw up, just willing to be vulnerable. But that's a really powerful one as well.
So that book, I don't remember who the author is. It's downstairs in my house right now. I did a virtual women's retreat for a trade association here in Washington, and they sent me this beautiful thank you gift basket, and that book was in the basket, and it's just downstairs in a stack of books that I know I want to read. And now that I know that it's one of your favorites, I am definitely going to put it to the top of the pile. Just like I was telling Alicia last week when I found out that she has not read this book. When I have talked to her about it so many times, I was like, girlfriend, you need to buy this. And she just sent me a text the other night. And so maybe we'll do a playing big book club over the summer. Something special like that.
Thank you to Allison. Rashma Sajani is the name of the author.
Oh,
thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much. And I'd love to hear from you all in the chat, because my guess is that if you came here today, this is a topic you're interested in. And so if you have a favorite book, a favorite podcast, a favorite TED Talk, feel free to throw it into the chat. We would love to hear that for you. Alicia, another quick question, and let's keep this brief because I want to have time for us to wrap and close thoughtfully with our group, and even maybe get them out of here a minute or two early so that they can take a hot second before they jump to whatever they have at the top of the hour. Any quick last tips? We've talked about reducing fear. Any quick tips for actively living courageously? You spoke already about getting to know our true self. Anything beyond that we can leave our group with today about actively living courageously?
Yeah. So I really think it starts with creating a vision for your life. What do you want it to be? So often we just get pulled along with the current and do the things that are expected of us, but really taking the time to create a vision of what you want your life to be. And then, okay, what does it take to get there? And then making that your plan. Like just that's the goal. That's what's going to happen. And then being mindful of what are the things that can get in the way and how am I going to address them when they do? But I think living a purposeful life is so central to overcoming fear because that helps with the what's on the other side, right? If you know what's important to you and why, getting through those fearful moments is so much easier because you can visualize what's on the other side and why it's important, why you're digging through those bushes to get out into the sunlight.
And it's so interesting when I just even think about my own personal experiences. I think about when have there been times where I made a decision minimizing for fear or minimizing for stress. And that's where I hear a lot of that should messaging. Oh, you should do this. You should do that. Everyone expects that you should do X, Y, Z thing. Versus where in my life am I optimizing for joy, excitement, adventure? Things to your point, those are core values that I have in my life. Fun is a core value I have in my life. And when I think about moments where I've let my fear hold me back, I let fear win out over excitement and curiosity. And so, if there's anything that I want to leave our audience here with today, it is to be curious, to be thoughtful, to challenge yourself on what the cost is of fear, and to Alicia's just incredibly eloquent point, spend energy not just quelling the fear, situation like playing whack-a-mole on your fear, but instead really stepping back and living a more purposeful life. And so, Alicia, I want to thank you just so much. And we're going to begin to conclude. Like I said, I want to get you all out a few minutes before the top of the hour. And Alicia, before we do that, anything that our group should know about? I know that you're running a group program that's going to kick off. Anything really briefly that you want to tell us about?
Yeah, so I'm going to be launching in April with a partner, a group program called FIND, Frame, Imagine, Navigate, Do. And it's designed for the initial cohort is women, but for people who are really looking to understand, what do I want? What is my purpose? How do I get there? And we leverage coaching. So there's coaching involved, but there's also sort of, recognition of development needs, action planning. And we're really excited about it because it brings together the idea of coaching as well as community and shared learning. And so we're really excited to kick that off. There's information on my website. I don't know if I can't remember. I think I forgot to send
Yeah.
Brittany, the link, but
And
you have.
we'll send your contact out to everyone. And Alicia is just so fabulous. I want to thank her again, and I want to thank you all for coming and share some upcoming events that we have here at Something Major. And Britt, if you'll just throw the links to those in the chat, as we mark the 1-year anniversary here at Something Major of the pandemic, we're focused right now on staying well and burnout. So I hope you'll come back and join us on Thursday, March 18th for a panel called Burned Out Work in Crisis, where we will hear from an all-star panel, global executives, women who work at tech companies, at places like Google, in all different phases of their career, about what they're doing to keep their sanity and keep their teams thriving. We're going to be having Karen come back, our dear friend, Dr. Karen Barnard, on March 26th for a conversation, our next Let's Do Lunch, on taking the woo-woo out of the mind-body connection. And for my fellow working moms in the group, on Wednesday, March 31st, we're going to be kicking off a new series called Working Moms Burnout Boot Camp. I know a lot of things about working motherhood and not a lot about other topics like parenting. So for Burnout Boot Camp, I'm bringing in the experts I turn to in my personal life, starting with parenting expert and author Claire Lerner, who's going to be taking your questions about parenting without pulling your hair out of your head in the middle of the pandemic. Alicia, I want to thank you again for coming. You are just such a treasured friend, not just of me personally, but of the Something Major community. We're going to send your contact info out, my contact info out. I want to encourage all the members of the Something Major community to stay connected with you, to follow your content. I know I always learn something new. I have no doubt that your program will be phenomenal. And again, I just want to thank everyone. Once again, Something Major is really dedicated to empowering working women and working mothers to live their very best and most fearless lives, and helping their organizations do the same. So please feel free to reach out to me, Randi Braun, with any questions. Brittany put my contact information in the chat. And again, we'll be sharing my contact information and Alicia's. I know I speak for both Alicia and myself when I say we look forward to letting this be the beginning of a conversation and to seeing you again at either a Something Major or an Alicia Daugherty coaching program. Thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend.